which became pygmy. And one of the sites we'll hear about this afternoon, Dreamer's Bay, is very close to the site of Isotope, where these pygmy hippos and elephants, one of the places where they dwelt and were exterminated by man. We know also of the obsidian traders who came to the north coast of the island and landed at Akanthu, and that their obsidian came from Cappadocia, and that site dates to BP 10,400 BC. We have 3 papers in this session that are devoted to harbors, and 2 that deal with commercial items that were grown here on Cyprus. I'm sorry we do not have a paper on salt and sugar, which also were extremely important export items. We tried, but in vain. But we do have copper, which is probably the most significant of all, and John Leonard will be speaking of the Carob trade and its significance. Our first speaker is Jean-Yves Empereur, who has been working at the site of Amethyst since 1984, and it gives us great pleasure to show to all of you the publication that has just been completed with the aid of the Anna Frost Foundation. This is an extremely interesting and curious harbor because it never really was used, and it went out of use at the time of the sinking of the Kyrenia ship at 295 BC. So Jean-Yves, please.
Thank you very much, Leonard, for these kind words. And again, thank you to the Foundation, Anna Frost Foundation, for its help in this research on Amethyst Harbor. You see here a general view of the harbor. In the lower part of the slide, and in the upper part you have the hill on which a French school at Athens works and excavates from 1975, the palace and other public buildings, even a basilica of this huge city of ancient Cyprus. So we excavate there during 3 campaigns from 1984 to 1986 underwater. And we could make some, as you will see, some trenches inside the inner basin of the harbor. And thanks to the British base in Akrotiri, we could benefit from, as you see, aerial photographs from an helicopter by 3 times, and this could enable us to make some plans of this huge harbor, as you will see. The work was difficult because of the presence of huge massifs of Posidonia grass everywhere, and we had to clean this Posidonia before discovering the upper course of these headers. The means were given by the French school at Athens, and also by an association, Cyprus association for the conservation of the ancient port of Amethyst. So we had 2 pontoons working, as you see on the sketch here, very modestly at the time, so it was the means we had, and of course with sucking the as you see below, the mud, and displacing and making the topography from the underwater and from the seashore, as you see here, and so moving the blocks which were above the upper course with balloons. Thanks to the helicopters, that, as I say to you, we could make good view. We had nice views on the three molds, and we could make aerial photogrammetry of these huge molds. As you will see, every mold is equal to more than 150 meters long. And so we could proceed to 19 soundings along the three molds. So the what works? No, so I made a the western mold here, the south mold, the eastern mold, and the entrance of the harbor, which is here. You see all the soundings got a number here, and I shall show you some sample of them where we saw the lower part of the molds. So you see first pontoon when we made so the first trench on along the inner part of the southern mold. When you go down, so you see the place of the trench, and here is 8 courses of headers. When we remove all the small stones which were recovering the inner part of the harbor. This was mixed to much pottery of the end of the 4th century AD, and which filled completely the inner part of this inner harbor. So the trench revealed, so when removing the small stones, so you see here 7 courses of headers, and the same in most of the other trenches, and we could number all these courses as you see here. And so we had a first idea of the making of these molds. You see the pontoons move towards the entrance of the harbor, and there we made also, you see here the entrance, the mouth of the inner harbor, and here you have the change of sense of the headers, and here in other direction. So here it's the inner part of the entrance itself. So we could make a documentation of each of these blocks and understand, so from these trenches, the typology of these headers with 7 types of bosses, and also to make the typology of the blocks according to the size. The boss were of different shape, as you see here, and we could so characterize this typology of the blocks. We had, you will see in the publication some tables of showing all the blocks we have treated, and also the size. So the headers are around 1 ton, but they can go up to 3 tons. They are made from the neighboring quarries, which are on the sea shore of the and on the hill that you have seen on the first picture. So on the seashore you have the first quarries. As you can see here, you have negatives of the slabs of the headers, and you can see here exactly the size of the headers that we have found inside the harbor itself. So the bosses let easier moving of and transportation to the mole during its construction, and also we found the way they use the crossbars, as you see here, the trusses, to put in place the blocks underwater. We have not the upper row, as we know, because the upper row was sealed. Here you can see the negative of dovetails, and we found only one of them, which is 56 kilograms of lead, perhaps inside some other metal like bronze or iron. So it's a very, very big dovetails, comparable only on what we have found in the lighthouse of Alexandria. So to put these headers on place, you can imagine a very simple machine like this one. So progressing during the construction of the mold itself, when putting the stones on place, and we can see here even you see here this line, this column separated from the other one. It gives us the length of the crane itself, as you can see here. So we made, so as you see here, some trenches, but along the seashore there is no other wall, it's only beach rock, and we can suppose that the harbor was bigger in this northern face than it is now. You have here the modern road coming from Limassol here. For the chronology, it's given, as I say to you, by the pottery. The pottery is locally made. There is a kiln place and a factory for pottery nearby, and also the chronology is given by the coins. Here you have several coins identified by Olivier Picard as belonging to Demetrios Poliarchitis. So they were found at the entrance of the harbor. And so we have here the traces of the Hellenistic harbor, but we have no idea about the more ancient harbor, the archaic one. I thought in the tombs of the necropolis of Amathus are found regularly some models of warships, like here you see the shields along the walls of the ship, or commercial ships here, as we see from the exhibition rooms of the museum. So perhaps this archaic, the more ancient harbor is to be looked for you have the harbor we have seen here, to be looked for here in this inner harbor, which is not excavated yet, but where there is no construction, if according to the drills which were made during the years 73 of the last century. And so there is another excavation to be made here on land to see if there is here the continuation of the harbor, because we have not found any ship sheds, any traces of use of sheds for the warships, because it's certain when you see this entrance of the harbor, which is only 5 meters width, you can suppose that this harbor was military. It was certainly constructed by Demetrios Poliorcete in 305 before Christ, after his brilliant victory in the naval battle of Salamis against Ptolemy, where he seized hundreds of military boats of the naval fleet of Ptolemy, and so he built quickly this naval harbor to have protection for his new boats. But when Ptolemy took over the island in 295 before Christ, it abandoned the harbor. We don't know why. Perhaps because there was silting by all this pottery and mud and stones coming naturally from the seashore, perhaps for military reasons because he didn't want an harbor opposite to Alexandria, which is only 475 kilometers far from Amatus, and so the harbor was abandoned before being really used. And so thanks to, first, to David Blackman, which I want to thank warmly here, we could publish a book with a very nice reviser, like David, and thanks to the support of the Honor Force Foundation, which contribute financially to the making of this book, of the layout, and of some studies of it, which is printed by the French School at Athens. And so only 2 more views. This excavation was made in Cyprus, but now we move to Thasos Harbor in northern Greece, which I excavated in the same years, and which will be the further target for our next studies and next publication. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. It's a phenomenal project and one I've been waiting very eagerly for the final publication. It's amazing to think, we always think about harbors embedded in economics and the push and pull of supply and demand, but here it's so embedded within political factors and of the early Hellenistic period. Surely there will be questions for Jean-Yves, so I will turn it over to you. Lena, easily.
Did you do some studies to see whether the harbor would have functioned properly for it being made to take in basically warships, I assume? But the entrances always struck me to be extremely small. This
entrance is very narrow, in fact, but it could could enter the triremes without problem. It was 5 meters are enough for that. And we think that it was never finished and never used and abandoned. I think the explanation by a political decision of Ptolemy is the best, the stronger to avoid and to at the same moment he founded his new capital in the town of Paphos. And so he abandoned somewhat. You know, at the same time, the palace on the hill is burnt and abandoned too. So.
The question, Stella, please. Yes.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to Tuesday now, to visiting the site. But I have a question, maybe I didn't understand correctly. But you said that the interpretation is that Demetrios built the harbor after the Battle of Salamis to accommodate all the captured ships.
His ships and the new ones and the old ones, perhaps, yes.
Why Amathus?
I mean, why Amathus?
Yes, Kition is more suitable and more protected.
Yes, but he did the same for the palace. We found a lot of coins of Demetrios in the palace in Amathus. So. And he did the same when he went after to Rhodes. He built some moles, as we know for the ancient sources. So he was a builder of harbors.
So he wanted the challenge. That's what he wanted, because it's a difficult site.
Do I have time?
Yes, one last.
Try mine, and if not, okay. It seems that it works. I'm asking for a totally different aspect. I'm a geologist dealing with sea level changes. Do you, or maybe David, have an idea what was the original height of these moles or jetties above sea level originally when they were built?
So, yes, we have a big problem with the sea level because perhaps it was also a phenomenon of the sea level going down. You know, I have not spoken about the harbor after, so it's abandoned. But in fact, near the seashore, we have excavated also sweet water wells. And so it means that the sea level went down, but very, very deeply. And so you could add wells and sakia, so water wheels even, we have discovered along the seashore. But after, the sea level came up, as it is now, above the level of the moles. So it's we have no real explanation from the geomorphologists, but I hope that one day it will come. It's a double phenomenon.
We should probably move on, but please join me in thanking once again Jean Van Perth.
Thank you.
Terrific. Our next presentation today is at a site that is tremendously complicated but full of tremendous potential, and it's exciting to see it getting renewed attention. With the team today represented, I think Simon James will be speaking on behalf of a team that includes Lucy Blue as well, on investigations into the ancient port of Dreamers Bay and the maritime environment of the Akrotiri Peninsula, Cyprus. So please, Simon.
Sorry, Justin. Should we dance?
We should.
Well, thank you very much, Justin. And I'd like to also thank Lucy and Stella for this wonderful conference, and of course the Honor Frost Foundation for funding our work. In the 1970s, remains of an ancient port were identified on the southern coast of the Akrotiri Peninsula at Dreamers Bay, Nisaruyun, where the only low ground on an otherwise cliff-dominated coast lies adjacent to a small bay. Lying inside the RAF Air Base, the area has been very little affected by modern development, but storms exposed remains of ancient shoreline buildings. And while initial survey work by avocational archaeologists also identified a submerged masonry breakwater, a mole or jetty in the protecting the nearby harbour. And they also identified extensive traces of ancient quarrying on the cliffs above the bay. Now, initial survey work, both underwater and on land, by John Leonard, Stella Domestica, Brad Alt, and Justin Leidwanger, suggested the port may have Hellenistic origins, although the shoreline structures, to judge by the masses of ceramics, apparently belonged primarily to the late Roman and early Byzantine era. The University of Leicester's involvement began as a rescue dig, helping the UK base authorities with their heritage stewardship responsibilities regarding the eroding shoreline remains. But from the outset, the objective was to develop this as a figurative and almost literal beachhead for a larger research project on the peninsula. Now, as landlocked Leicester does not do maritime archaeology, at least up until now, we quickly established a partnership with the University of Southampton and are developing also collaboration with Cypriot colleagues to work on all this. So with myself as project director and senior University of Leicester professional field archaeologist Vicky Score as a field director, coming to work in the sun rather than muddy fields in Leicestershire for a change, we completed 3 of a projected 5 seasons of field work. So I'm going to outline the landward results, and Lucy will then talk about the geomorphological and marine aspects. So Leicester's focus has been on the shoreline buildings, which extend for half a kilometre, and we sought to establish the extent of occupation through trenching, and in January, since I arrived here, I found we got the funding from the Ministry of Defence, amazingly, to do geophysics behind the beach, the shoreline buildings. And as yet, we found no indications of buildings behind those already known on the shoreline. At the moment, it looks as though there was no more extensive port settlement, as has hitherto sometimes been assumed. And further, the known buildings, although they're scattered along this rather ragged stretch of coastline, largely correspond to a common orthogonal layout, suggesting some measure of planning and control of development of these port facilities. The individual structures also proved to be more complex, and some of them are much better preserved than we'd initially feared. Initially, it looked as though we only had the bottoms of foundations remaining amid these scatters of generally late antique ceramics. But in several structures, floors and occupation debris survive. In Area 2, in the middle of this area of buildings, what seemed to be a simple masonry box proved to have multiple subdivisions containing complete amphorae and cooking pots. And these were apparently pretty much in situ, intact or crushed, preserved, because it seems the building had collapsed on them. And the ceramics remain to be studied, but some of the forms, at least to our eyes, and of course, you know, we're just learning about the Cypriot ceramics as newcomers to this field. Some of the forms resemble those recovered from the Kurion earthquake house. So our current working hypothesis is that the port was another victim of the event which devastated Kurion in the mid-4th century AD. And this structure in Area 2 was never rebuilt. Now, at the eastern end of the scatter of buildings, another area of well-preserved stratigraphy indicates a rather longer sequence. And here a rubber trench was excavated this last April, packed with 1/4 ton of amphora fragments, probably representing, we think, post-earthquake disposal of debris and salvaging of building stone to erect the second phase walls on this particular part of the site. So we have a new building, apparently we think we're suggesting post-earthquake, so probably used, we think, in the late 4th century and beyond. And this part of the site is closest to the bay, so perhaps what we're seeing here is a reduced but continuing early Byzantine set of port facilities. And this latter area has produced copper alloy objects, including a rather nice small weight with a Cairo on it, and curved nails, and the possible sailmaker's needle. So this is all nice and consistent with both trading activities and maintenance of shipping. And then next year, we plan to begin investigation of the quarries further along the cliff line here, which we think comprise another major element of what is actually an extensive port landscape. So far, the port's land components have offer no firm indication of any constructed facilities prior to the 4th or perhaps the later 3rd century AD. And further, the excavated buildings, this is something our very experienced field excavators have commented on, showing remarkably little evidence of domestic occupation such as food debris or personal items, and most people seem to have been working and cooking their lunches down there. So we think at the moment we're dealing just with storage and maintenance buildings. The site was perhaps occupied only during the sailing season, and even then most of the workforce probably lived elsewhere, which brings us to the port's wider context. Now, there are several substantial village-sized settlements, little explored, but also apparently from surface indications of late antique date, only 1 kilometre or 2 from the port and the quarries. And the labour force for all of these industrial facilities presumably lived up there. But what actually did the port serve and how? Its apparently planned or controlled layout suggests, I think, involvement of authorities most likely above the level of very organic-looking local village sites. Eleni Prokopiou's excavation of the massive, lavish, but apparently short-lived ecclesiastical complex at the westernmost of the village sites, Katalimita ton Plakaton, indicates imperial level interests, although I suspect these may well have been quite transient. She's argued that this is in the special context of refugees fleeing the Sasanian occupation of Palestine and Egypt, large numbers of clergy and bringing important relics with them, and them being here for a couple of decades at Akrotiri. More generally, as has been previously mooted, the port likely, in some sense, also served Kurion. So we're wondering whether, rather than dealing with a Dreamers Bay port, perhaps we should be thinking rather of the Akrotiri port landscape, with all of these villages and other sites and harbours and anchorages around the coast, or possibly even a larger scale Akrotiri Kurion port landscape. So was Akrotiri at the time of the late antique structures down at Dreamers Bay already connected to Kurion by road as well as sea? And this depends on the date of the formation of the Great Western Tombolo Beach, which turned Akrotiri from an island into a peninsula, which brings us by a neat segue to questions of geomorphology, ancient sea level, and the wider maritime aspect, which Lucy will talk about.
Thank you, Simon. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and also Feriol Salomon, who's most definitely the geomorphologist in this equation. So, as Simon has indicated, we're essentially trying to ascertain, well, let's take a step back. In order to understand Dreamers Bay in its context, we're trying to look at the broader landscape effectively and answer some of those questions that Simon's just posed with respect to the dating, the sequencing of the Tombolo sequence, Tombolos that joined the mainland to the island. And I'll refer back to that in a bit. Obviously, this is in the context of previous work, not only with respect to the underwater work that Simon has referred to by members of the audience, but also many people have done surveys on this pristine peninsula, and also there have been previous coring activities in terms of the Pluto project. And I have to add, actually, even I had a look at this many years ago, as Elena remembers, hypothesizing at the time about this process of sedimentation and how the island was joined to the mainland in respect to late Bronze Age harbours, but that was some decades ago. So myself and Feriol, having been invited to join the project, started at Dreamers Bay, but quite rapidly realised, as Justin has reminded us, that this is quite a complex landscape, and in fact we needed to broaden our view, as it were, to try and identify bigger issues to do with landscape change in the region, hence the methodology mapped out here with respect to working with the Salt Lake, and then more recently this last season looking at other coastal features that give us indications of relative sea levels or sea level notches, anything to do that can help us trying to work out this quite complex landscape change. So just to zoom back into Dreamers Bay, this is a view of the site from essentially just to the west of the breakwater or mole, looking at the different sort of geology of the landscape, a sort of inundated landscape to the west towards the settlement of the Leicester excavation, and then very much a steep cliff-line coast eroding face to the east of the region. And at the base of that is the mole. I won't go into a lot of detail other than I had a quick snorkel over, and that's about as far as it got. And the issue with this is the connection. Why was it built? When was it built? Obviously, the connection with the actual cliff behind, because there's a gap between the end of the breakwater and the cliff. So we need to establish that erosional sequence. Was it connected to a shelter that was functioning to do with the Leicester excavations, or was it more to do with the quarries, and how are they all connected? And ultimately, it's currently sitting about 1 metre below, with the surface that's extant is 1 metre below sea level. The base of the breakwater that is visible is about 2.5 metres. So there are lots of questions that we need to address. It does appear, from looking at the LiDAR data, that the bay to the east, as Simon has indicated, is possibly a more substantial anchorage with, if we take a cross-section, I need that pointer. it's very difficult to see from here. There, this is the cross-section we did, with the LiDAR data, obviously, and you can see the breakwater in the middle, but you can see that the bay to the east is substantially deeper. Anyway, so this is the context of our dilemma, I guess, in terms of trying to work out what's going on with the breakwater. And it's at that point, in season 2, we stepped back and thought more about the broader context. How are we going to understand this process of the tombolo formation and sea levels more generally, bearing in mind that obviously we have a dynamic landscape which isn't just a simple sequence of sedimentation from maybe the river Chorus, etc., but it's also possibly going to involve tectonic activity. So this, I think, is going to be an investigation that's going to take some time unravelling. And I have to add here that we also have considerable help from the Geological Survey in the form of Miltiades and also Zeze. So I'm very grateful to their input for this. So we decided to do a sequence of sedimentological assessment, undertaking 4 cores. We had hoped to get into the salt lake a little bit more, but regrettably it was too mobile for the machinery that we had. Here are the 4 cores dotted around the edges of the salt lake, and this is the results. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time, but basically you can see a sequence which is, I'm presuming, an open bay at the beginning, and then gradually a sequence of siltation. Obviously it's slightly different depending on the position of the core across the salt lake, through to an enclosed, presumably lagoon, and then completely enclosed lake through to the salt lake itself. Obviously the issues here are how and when, and so we have started doing further analysis that is still undergoing, and we're looking to try and identify through various different analyses. There are more here, as I think I listed on the last slide, but we already have some dates. I'm hoping to get some more through radiocarbon and OSL, but the initial indication is, going back to answer Simon's question, it's very likely that the western tombolo, which is more substantial in its structure, was already in place, which is what we sort of assumed at the period of possibly the 4th millennium. But then we have to start asking, well, how long did that sequence of infilling take subsequently? Yet to answer that one. We also attempted a series of just sort of doing more survey, I guess, around the peninsula itself, partly to identify further archaeological evidence, partly to think about anchorages which may have been appropriate for mooring, and also to look for further indicators of relative sea level. This is with my colleague Feriol, who's far more experienced in these things. We were able to find new sites. We weren't able to get to the southern shores very much. It was the weather was not in our favour, but we did identify further rock cuttings here and notches and other indications, but unfortunately nothing that we could actually take samples from and date, which was rather frustrating. But we haven't given up, and we're going to try again next year. But also what was interesting was quite a substantial amount of archaeological evidence along this shore, and I would like to do some further investigation there with respect to trying to look more broadly in the sense of where other anchorages may have been utilised at different periods over the changing life of this island stroke peninsula, because obviously people were going to have to be responding to those changes in respect to where they were anchoring and am I over time or am I okay? Oh, okay. It's typical, isn't it? Anyway, I think this is the penultimate one. So yeah, these are some of the further indications of anthropological activity. I'm also quite interested in the southern area of the Salt Lake, where we found the natural geology is probably something which would be a good basis for the potential harbour on the southern side of the previous lake, lagoon, open water. But again, this needs further investigation. So just to finish, we have probably raised more questions as we ever do, and we have intentions, we have 2 more seasons hopefully under this current permit, with a number of issues, further investigation of the breakwater, reanalysis of some of the sites that we visited. I can't even see the list from here and I can't read it on the screen, I'm afraid, so you can see them. And yeah, so this is work in progress. I think that, yes, there we go. Thank you very much to everybody that has supported this project, and both in terms of the department and also our funders. Thank you.
So are there any questions for Lucy?
Or Simon.
Or Simon? You're here?
That's me.
Okay, who's got the microphone? Yes, where we start? Hands up again so I can see. Piece of paper in the air, yes.
Yes, me.
Yes, you.
Hi. Could you go back to the slide just before the future work one? There's this notch down by the right corner. What is that exactly?
This one?
Yeah.
The rock cutting.
Lower right corner, is that a?
It's a rock cutting. It's a channel. It could be. There's a bollard. Well, 2 bollards actually associated with it. But the relationship between the bollard and the rock cutting and the actual. Well, obviously there's a relative position of sea level now compared to whenever it was cut in the past, or maybe not so past. And then there's rock on the seaward side of it. So it's a little bit ambiguous as to the exact relationship of the, whatever it is, feature with the sea. But I think a lot of these, the anthropological, anthropomorphic indicators, anthropological, anyway, sorry. We need to make the assessment of them once we've got a handle on the relative sea levels at these different periods, and this is the biggest issue really. And there is further sedimentological work going on and in the salt lake, so there are more cores. And I think really that the salt lake and the sedimentological analysis of the salt lake is going to be the key to at least beginning that investigation. Our colleagues in Geological department, and Miltiades as part of the University of Athens, has also been looking at some of the sand dune formations in the area. So we're hitting it on all levels basically. But I think until we're able to nail that, it's going to be very difficult to interpret a lot of the other sort of archaeological features. Does that make sense?
So it might, according to the sea level change, it might be, you mean to let the ship keel pass?
Oh no, it's not that big. No way. No. It is a channel. It's about this. You know, it's no.
The scale is not.
Unfortunately, no. I would have highlighted that, Lucy. Definitely.
Sorry, no,
I would have been excited about that. Yeah, no scale. I know, terrible. That's partly because I've had to reduce the pictures down to nothing.
Other questions? Yes, next to Robin. Yes, Keith, I think it is. Yes.
I don't know how far you want to extend your search for buildings, Simon, but I do know that in Antiquity I was there for 3 years, and there's some buildings right in the old buildings under mounds of earth, which are obviously very old, amongst the modern buildings.
Yes, those are the Casa Limita villages I showed. Yes. I have my eye on those, but that'll be a couple of years down the road.
There's quite a lot of them too, so it's quite an extensive settlement there.
There are 2 quite substantial villages in the middle of the airbase,
That's
yes
right.
Indeed, yeah.
Okay, sure.
I think we'll have to stop the questions there, so please, after the session, do catch Lucy and catch Simon. I just wanted to mention that back in the 80s, a shipwreck was found in the shingle on the western side of the peninsula. And there was a rescue not even an excavation, survey done by the Department of Antiquities. And it appeared to be not clear whether Roman or Hellenistic, but there was a small Venus statuette found on board as part of the finds, as well as the hull. So there are many more treasures to be found in the land between the mainland and the Akrotiri Peninsula itself. Now, our third speaker is John Leonard, who also has mentioned in the previous paper, and who has been working on the island since 1984. He is going to give a paper on the Cypriot carob industry, what was known as black gold, and we'll learn how the carob stores that dot the coastlines of Cyprus have a very important tale to tell. Their significance also is part of the historical heritage of the island of Cyprus. So, John.
Advance.
No, only the points here can we change with the arrows.
Okay. This is the point. Fine. Thanks. Okay, well, hello everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here at this extraordinary conference. Kind of reminds me of one of the earliest experiences I had with a Maritime conference in Cyprus back in the mid-90s, Cyprus and the Sea Conference. This slide here is appropriate not only for this talk today, but it also reminds me, if you look at the source, you'll see that it comes from one of the very earliest Maritime conferences, Avner Rabban's conference in Haifa. And Avner was at the Cyprus and the Sea Conference. That was my first experience with Avner Rabban. He showed up, obviously, without any sleep, or at least very hungover, wearing a very tight black T-shirt, ex-Israeli commando that he is, or was, and never looked at the audience once, always looked down, and went about 3 times over his time limit. And despite Professor Carob trying to stop him, it never succeeded, and he continued through his entire presentation, and by the end, we knew everything about Cyprus. So today, I hope I will not be that bad, but there may be a little bit of Rabban style here. I have written out my remarks, and I'm going to try to stick to them. Maybe that will help. So, and I would also, I'd like to extend my own thanks to our session leaders and also to the organizers of this conference. This is really a great pleasure to be involved in this. Today, my paper concerns evidence for ports and in Cyprus, and evidence for these ports, textual, archaeological, and comparative evidence or information derived from both the ancient past and the present. Now, I have talked about Cypriot ports in the past, and harbors, and carobs, and archival evidence for ports. But today, the main focus will be the northern coasts of Cyprus, an area that I have not previously discussed in any detail. The results of northern field research discussed here today come from the studies conducted prior to the invasion of 1974. The conclusions that I offer stem in large part from my own previous doctoral research carried out both in academic or archival libraries and in the field within the free unoccupied areas of Republic of Cyprus. My 2005 dissertation, although a broad-ranging examination of ancient Cypriot harbors, we'll go back for a moment. The title, as you see, Roman Cyprus Harbors, Hinterlands, and Hidden Powers, was mainly concerned with Roman-era ports and the role they played in the local and maritime economy of Roman Cyprus. But as the dissertation title indicates also, coastal land use and the internal areas of the island that relied on the ancient ports, that is, their socio-economic hinterlands, were also a concern in the study. In order to more fully understand the port site's relations or connectivity, both within Cyprus itself and with off-island areas, which the Cypriot ports served as channels or gateways of commercial activity. So, thus, the location of ancient Cypriot ports and the scope of their respective hinterlands were two primary questions to be addressed in the original project, and these same two questions lie at the heart of my presentation today. How then do we find ancient ports that do not appear in ancient historical sources, or that do not possess obvious architectural remains? And how do we determine the extent of the local catchment area or hinterland of individual ports from which commercial goods and people were drawn to these particular coastal sites? This is where the island of Cyprus has something quite unique to offer. That is detailed, comparative, pre-modern archival evidence from the early 20th century agricultural production and shipping, which is proving highly informative as a research tool for better understanding ancient economic and maritime practices. The traditional Carob industry in Cyprus, in particular, offers the present-day investigator a body of data with the potential to shed important light on various aspects of ancient coastal trade, including not only the locations of small local export ports, but the distances traveled overland by producers to reach local ports, the speed of land transport between local ports, the potential density of local ports in ancient times, and even the relationship between primary producers of agricultural and other goods and secondary merchants or middlemen who perhaps also in Roman times would have been responsible for gathering these goods together and shipping them out. The Cypriot Carob industries' early 20th century coastal infrastructure and collection or distribution practices together represent an important comparative hypothetical modeling tool with which, in conjunction with archaeological survey data, we can begin to fill informational gaps in the historical record, especially concerning the existence of small local export ports. Furthermore, historical and archival sources also point to a lengthy persistence of piracy along the northern shores of Cyprus. This fact, when interpreted in light of the Carob data, offers one possible clue as to what may have happened to the late 4th century BC Kyrenia ship in its final hours prior to its sinking off Cyprus's north coast. Now, from an historical perspective, we understand today that Cyprus in antiquity represented, much as it still does, a busy eastern Mediterranean crossroads, geographically, culturally, and commercially. Cypriot seas were filled with local or foreign ships of every size, which regularly took advantage of the island's well-known coastal topography for refuge, the replenishing of vital supplies, and the transport of goods and passengers for economic gain. On a larger scale, Cyprus's strategic geographical position has long made the island a political plaything or occasionally a significant military bastion of outside imperial powers. Powers that have repeatedly over the past 3 millennia vied for dominance in the region. Nevertheless, if we consider the earliest textual account of the Cypriot coasts, the testimony of Pseudo-Skylax about the middle of the 4th century BC, the overall picture of Cypriot ports is quite Spartan, with only 7 port sites attested in the text. 5 of them you will notice located on the northern coasts, north of the present-day UN Green Line, including Salamis, Carpathia, Kyrenia, Lapithos, and Soli. The primary historical sources of the northern ports of Cyprus, and for those of the island generally, belong to the Roman period. These include Strabo, Pliny, Ptolemaeus, and the singular Periplus or Sailor's Handbook, the Stadiasmus Maris Magni, of perhaps the late 3rd or mid 4th century AD. Through time, the textual documentation of Cypriot ports and coasts becomes fuller and the picture clearer. A sharp distinction can be seen between the more northerly coasts and the east, south, and west coasts, where the island's major port cities have long existed. The more northerly coasts feature smaller ports and towns, the most notable being Soli, and in modern times, Karavostasi, Lapathos, Karavas, Kyrenia, Carpasia, and Urania. I'm not going to try to reproduce the Turkish names for you. Typically, historical sources focus on the larger ports and overlook or underplay the smaller harbors and anchorages. The early 16th century admiral, Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis, writes concerning Kyrenia, on the island's northern coast, there are but few places where a ship may lie. On that side, there is a castle, and they call it Girin Nabuferi, but before it lies a tiny little harbor. There is no harbor on the northern side of the island that is better known than this one. Likewise for Famagusta, the Ottoman admiral records a beautiful castle facing east. Before the castle is a double harbor, an inner harbor and an outer harbor. There is no finer place on the island. From antiquity then, through the Middle Ages and into the pre-modern era, the north coast of Cyprus has always been home to small, mostly natural ports, more suited to local and regional sea traffic. A British colonial official comments in a government file opened in 1907, according to shipmasters, quoting now, the whole of the north coast is very exposed and is considered dangerous owing to the steep incline and hard nature of the seabed, which affords insecure anchorage. I can see no possibility of Kyrenia rivaling the ports on the south coast. The official was writing about steamers, however, not sailing ships. What he does not say is that at the same time that he was penning this entry, rural growers and town-based merchants were rapidly proving that small local export ports were an essential, vastly important part of the island's economy. And that where there is an economic will, there is a way, even along an exposed coast. Now, in Dimitris Christodoulou's immensely informative land use study of Cyprus, published in 1959, he offers a small, almost easily overlooked clue to the true dynamism of the rural Cypriot economy and to the age-old tendency in Cyprus to ship goods offshore from every available point on all sides of the island. This may have been done most energetically, however, from the north coast. It was really this small, inconspicuous map in Christodoulou that you see here in front of you that first sparked my interest in Carobs and Carob ports. Carobs have flourished in Cyprus for many centuries, probably since at least Roman times, although we are still waiting for archaeobotanical evidence to confirm this. If you look closely, you will see little triangles around that outer perimeter of the island, and those are the Carob stations. And this reflects the situation post-World War II, as you will see. Now, I'm going to launch into the Carobs, and by the time I'm done, you will all be experts on this subject. Carobs were known to ancient writers, including Theophrastus, Strabo, Pliny, Columella, Galen, and others. The carob tree and its fruit were called by various names, most of which appear to derive from keras, meaning horn, an allusion to the carob pod's horn-like shape. Carobs are perhaps best known as a nutritious, semi-sweet fodder for animals, fed for at least 2 millennia to pigs and other livestock or draft animals. However, Pliny reports that carob pods, after separation from the seeds, were also consumed by people, either raw or in processed form, as a molasses-like syrup, harupomelo, a naturally sweet flour also, and even in Syria as a type of wine. In addition, dried carob pods were put to medicinal use, such as in boiled potions to relieve stomach pain. Like figs, carobs are a natural source of sugar, and as such have also long been resorted to for at least minimal nourishment during famines, as we hear from Josephus, for example, about the famine in the Holy Land. Carob seeds, being extremely consistent in their size, were adopted by the Romans to represent their smallest unit of measurement, the siliqua, in the Roman weight system. In the 4th century AD, the carob seed, the keration, also became a unit of value, with 24 keratia to a Roman or Byzantine solidus. The keration seed forms the basis then for the standard unit that we still use today for measuring gold, the carat. Now, what does all this have to do with archaeology? In my last minutes, I have many threads here that I have to pull together for you, for your archaeological wonder and amazement. So, in pre-modern Cyprus, where the island's trees produce the highest quality carobs in the Mediterranean, the production and export of carobs and carob products became the Cypriots' fastest growing and most widespread agricultural industry during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Carobs ranked as the leading and most valuable agricultural crop from about 1870 until 1950. Most Cypriot carobs were exported to countries in all cardinal directions. In the late 1880s, the pioneering archaeologist D.G. Hogarth, during his archaeological journey on the Karpass, while visiting this area of Akanthou, observed that carob trees, quoting now, cover all this low ground. He further reported, quote, that the plain of Davlos, Flamoudi, and Akanthou is the richest carob and grain district in the island, which it certainly was until Limassol later took it over, eclipsed it. During the peak of the traditional carob industry between 1901 and the start of World War II in the late 1930s, Cyprus annually exported about 44,000 tons of carobs annually. So much money could be earned from the carobs that they came to be known as black gold. So as the range of uses and industrial applications expanded for carobs, the trade became an engine for the development of related industries. Is this mine? Can I drink this? Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you. For related industries, with coastal factories eventually being established for the chopping, kibbling of carob pods, the processing and milling of carob seeds, and the production of carob gum. For Cypriots, carobs came to signify a regular cash flow, greater economic security, entrepreneurial opportunities, and even the prospect of upward social mobility. Carobs are primarily a coastal crop that prefer to grow near the sea, especially on the northern slopes of the Kyrenia range and in the Limassol area. Nevertheless, all around Cyprus, the cultivation, collection, and export of carobs became an essential part of the annual rhythm of rural Cypriot life. During the August harvest, it was common to find entire families working unceasingly, even camping out overnight to protect their valuable crop, until their carob trees' fragrant brown pods had been completely gathered in. The Cypriot carob tree reached its the Cypriot carob trade reached its heyday during the 1930s, with the existence by 1940 of 67 coastal carob warehouses. Many of Cyprus's traditional early modern local export ports and the carob stores that often mark them are located on the exact sites of the island's ancient harbors, or lie in close proximity to coastal archaeological sites that may have been involved in maritime trade. In the south, carob warehouses are well known at sites including Pizzouri, Evdimou, Peyes Keratidi Bay. Sorry, let me go back. Okay. Pizzouri, Evdimou, Peyes, Keratidi Bay, and Paphos, just to name a few. On the northern coasts, we have carob stores at places like Kornos, Ios Ambrosios, Aphrodisios, Nereides is the toponym, Lakos, and you'll see in the distance there where the arrow is, Flamoudi carob store, just discernible. There it is, close up. And Galunia further east. Now, goods, carobs, and other agricultural products were shipped out from these places using lighters. These are, perhaps we can call them kaikis. They were sail-equipped, small boats. This is just one more shot at Galunia. You see the ground is covered with ancient pottery. So this is a very nice little discovery there. Lighters were sent out from these ports to the to steamers or large ships before the steamers during the medieval period that would come and anchor off these little sites. There became so many carob exportation sites that the British colonial government tried to shut them down in 1904 and then again in 1912 to try to tax the carobs and try to provide the agricultural grower with a better price and a better deal, to protect him, in other words, but also to reduce costs and increase profits for the big companies that were picking up the carobs. Okay, I will finish up. So look, in my last few moments, let me just give you a couple of figures here. First of all, the carobs were transported to these carob ports by bullock carts, but primarily by camels or mules or donkeys. And the growers were bringing their goods from within certain village lands. We know this from petitions that have been found in the archive, that exist in the archive, where the signatories say, we are from the villages of, for example, Orga, Aerini, Lavery, Orga, Cormakides, the Orios, Ketalipa. And so, you know, we know that within this area, this is the hinterland for this pre-modern port. Now, very, very quickly, if we look at archaeological data of, especially Sophocles Hadjisavas' survey right before the invasion, where he identified Hellenistic and Roman sites. Here's the Akanthou area, the Flamoudi area, the Davlos area. The circles are the big sites that are really important. You will see that there are a lot of sites there along the north coast, which show up in the archaeological record. Okay, I will make some concluding remarks. Archaeological and historical evidence, when combined with medieval and early modern information, especially that from detailed British colonial records of the early 20th century concerning the export of carobs and other Cypriot agricultural products, illustrates the remarkable accuracy of the often cited description of Cyprus in the 4th century AD by the Roman soldier and historian Ammianus Marcellinus as an insula portuosa, an island teeming with harbors, with ports. If we look back at Skylax, we see this Spartan picture, and when we put all of the evidence together, we have a very different image. So these sites are certainly have great potential for being investigated underwater and on land. In the north, we have only one small problem to overcome, and that is we have to solve the Cyprus problem before we can do field work. So there you go. Thank you very much.
Very interesting, John, but I'm afraid we do not have time for questions. So if you have questions, please catch John afterwards. Our next speaker, who will talk about Cyprus's most famous export, is Professor James Muley, who is the doyen of studies on ancient metals. His book, published in 1973, Copper and Tin, The Distribution of Mineral Resources and the Nature of the Metals Trade in the Bronze Age, based on his PhD, remains a seminal work. So, Professor Muley.
Which button do we press to advance the slides?
I hope it's, yes. Just,
that's forward?
Yes.
Okay.
The pointer is here.
If it doesn't work, use the arrows.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I thank the Honor Frost Foundation for organizing this extraordinary conference. I have to admit I'm something of an interloper. I've never dived in my life. My good friend Phil Betancourt always maintains that when you get wet, when you go into the water, you get cold and wet. And my aim in life is to stay warm and dry. There has not been much discussion regarding copper oxide ingots in recent years. It would seem that the major discoveries are now behind us. It is unlikely that in coming decades we will see anything comparable to the discovery of the Uluburun shipwreck with its cargo of 10 tons of copper ingots and 1 ton of tin ingots, along with other things including Canaanite jars and cullets of cobalt blue glass. The Point Iria shipwreck, with its total absence of metal ingots, is an important reminder that not all ships sailing the eastern Mediterranean in the 14th and 13th centuries BC carried cargoes of metal ingots. The Cape Gelidonia shipwreck of some 1200 BC remains unique as the traveling workshop of a metalsmith who worked in both copper and bronze with its assemblage of metalworking equipment together with ingots of copper and tin as well as scrap metal is still without precedent. Several controversies over the past 30 years have now been resolved. Metalworking on Cyprus is now seen as beginning in the 4th millennium BC. Cathleen's 1964 thesis that a bronze industry was brought to Cyprus by Aegean colonists in the early 12th century BC has been abandoned by everyone, including Kathleen himself. The heated discussion regarding lead isotope analysis and its ability to identify Cypriot copper, going back to a famous 1982 paper by Noel and Sophie Yale in Science, has now been resolved. There are still provenience problems to be worked out, but the basic idea that the copper oxide ingots spread over the entire Mediterranean world, including examples from Germany and the shores of the Black Sea, during the years from 1350 to 1200 BC, were all made of Cypriot copper. And this is now accepted by all scholars. This is the lead isotope diagram, and you see the concentration in the center of the oxide ingots together with the Cypriot copper ores. This includes the ingots from Sardinia and Corsica, as well as those in the cargoes of the Uluburun and Cape Gelidonia shipwrecks, as almost all of the discoveries of such ingots have been made at coastal or harbor sites or from shipwrecks. And here you have the distribution map of the ingots across the Mediterranean. It is clear that this was a seaborne trade. The ethnic identity of the ships in question has been hotly debated. But I would argue that Cypriot ingots were transported in the holds of Cypriot ships. Crete is no longer seen as a center of oxide ingot production, and the use of the name Keftiobaron is now only of historical interest. The idea began with the discovery of a collection of 27 such ingots from a treasury in the villa of Ayatriada in 1903, dating to late Minoan 1b. These ingots still can create serious problems, as they are not made of Cypriot copper, but of copper from some still undetermined source. But Cypriot copper was already being used in the metal industries of Crete. We have Cypriot copper in the metal workshop at Quartier Mou in Milmanoan 2B, Malia, and the house of the metal merchant in late Minoan 1B, Moklos, contained numerous fragments of oxide ingots made of Cypriot copper. This site has also produced our only surviving example of a tin ingot from late Bronze Age Crete. Crete was certainly part of the international metals trade of the late Bronze Age, a trade that went from Cyprus to Crete, to the Greek mainland, to Sardinia and Corsica, and beyond to the coasts of southern France and southern Spain. The necessity for this trade came from the search for new sources of copper and tin, and for new markets for the products produced from this metal industry. With the major technological transformation from bronze to iron in the 12th century, this trade came to an end, since almost every country had its own deposits of iron ore. The metals trade quickly became redundant. The question that still remains is, what happened to all this ingot copper? The bulk of bronze artifacts from the Aegean world in the 2nd millennium BC were not made of Cypriot copper, but of something that the Gaels have long called Laverian copper. According to a 2001 paper by Sophia Sos Gale of the Neopalatial bronze artifacts from Crete, only 16% were of Cypriot copper and 44% of Laverian copper. While not all the details behind these calculations have won general acceptance, the fact remains that we have minimal evidence for the use of Cypriot copper in the late Bronze Age Aegean. And this is our great puzzle. All of the ingots are made of Cypriot copper, but all the bronze objects have very little Cypriot copper. I have long been opposed to the very existence of Laverian copper. For Laverian is a geological area known for its lead-zinc ores, with the lead ores being argentiferous, containing a high percentage of silver. This is the silver that, thanks to Themistocles, financed the Athenian fleet that defeated the Persians at Salamis in 480 BC. In a little-known paper published in the Proceedings of the Second International Conference of the Archaeometallurgy in Europe, held in Aquileia, Italy in 2007, the Gales have finally published the geological evidence for Lavery on copper. It is very impressive. This is one of the photographs that Noel Gale kindly supplied to me, showing some of the copper deposits of Lavrion. The agreement I had with the late Noel Gale was that he would permit me to show his photograph, providing that I admitted the existence of Lavery on copper, which I am very happy to do. There can be no doubt that Lavrion could have been a major source of copper in the second millennium BC. This leaves us with the problem of the general absence of Cypriot copper in the bronze artifacts from the period when the trade in Cypriot copper oxide ingots was at its height. I do believe, however, that we have textual evidence to document that Cypriot copper actually came to the Aegean by ship. The Knossos Linear B tablet records the delivery of some 1,562 kilograms of a metal known as kakko in Linear B, classical Greek halkos. This tablet shows a drawing of an oxide ingot and the ideogram of a pan balance, and gives us figures that show that the total weight of 60 copper ingots was around 1,562 kilograms. This gives some 26 kilograms as the average weight for each ingot. This is close to the average weight of surviving copper ingots. This demonstrates that kakko came to the Aegean in the form of oxide ingots, and all such ingots are made of copper. Contrary to Mycenaean archaeologists, we do not have one single bronze ingot. If you look at any book on Mycenaean archaeology, they will tell you about bronze oxide ingots. They do not exist. Every ingot we know is made of very pure copper. With this in mind, we can read the reference in the Pylos tablet JN 829 to Kakonawio, not as temple bronze, as the Mycenaeanologists would have it, but as ship copper, a reference to the copper that came to Mycenaean Greece in ships similar to the one that sank off Uluburun. The traditional interpretation that this is a reference to melting down the bronze objects dedicated in the temple at Pylos is in a desperate attempt to get more metal for weapons in the crisis that existed just prior to the destruction of Pylos around 1200 BC. This suggestion of melting down votive objects dedicated at a temple is contrary to everything we know about ancient Greek religion. Votive objects belonged in a temple. They were dedicated to the gods. They were sacrosanct. They could not be taken away, thrown away, or otherwise discarded. The only acceptable thing was to bury them in a special pit. In other words, temple bronze is utter nonsense. The theological arguments of temple versus ship for Nawio are, I admit, ambiguous, but ship makes much better sense. We should also keep in mind that in classical Greek, the word for temple is never used to form adjectives. Cyprus seems to have quickly recovered from events at the end of the 13th century BC, perhaps because Cyprus had never developed a centralized palace economy. Cypriot metalworkers seem to have been among the first to develop a functioning iron industry already in the 12th century BC. This shows the distribution of the new export product for 12th century Cyprus, iron knives, most of them having bronze rivets, so-called bimetallic knives. In producing these knives, the Cypriot smiths pioneered in the development of the new technology necessary for turning wrought iron into a much more usable, much harder steel. This involved mastering the arts of carburization, quenching, and tempering. The bronze industry continued, of course, especially for works of art. But Iron Age Cyprus was a very different world from that known during the Bronze Age. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this masterful overview of what we now know about Cyprus is certainly one of its most important, if not the most important maritime export. Surely there will be questions, so I will turn it over to the audience.
Good.
I have a question about the bimetallic knives. There's no question, yes, anymore that they would be Cypriot. You do not, because there's been a lot of argument about them.
What, the ingots?
No, the bimetallic knives.
The what?
The knives.
The knives.
The 12th century knives, iron knives.
They're definitely Cypriot.
Definitely.
Yes, we know. We have the sites where they were produced, and we have studied these knives. I published a number of articles on these knives, together with my metallurgical colleague, former colleague, Robert Madden, the University of Pennsylvania, when we worked together for many years. Madden was one of the world's authorities on the use of iron. And we studied the way in which these knives were produced in Cyprus. There can't be any doubt that they are Cypriot products and were being exported abroad in the 12th and especially in the 11th century. Exactly. Where we have a great number of them from Crete.
Yeah, but in the Levant they were the hallmark of the Philistines. More or less.
Yeah. Now you're getting into treacherous deep waters. The whole idea of a Philistine iron monopoly has been abandoned. It simply cannot be defended any longer. There's no doubt that the Philistines worked in iron, but they did not develop the technology of producing the steel knives that are the hallmark of Cypriot production. It's really this technological transformation that made the Cypriot industry possible. And it's remarkable. It's a very complex technology. And the ancient metalsmiths knew nothing about the technology itself. The whole process of carburization, of introducing carbon into the wrought iron, was completely unknown to them. The very existence of the metal carbon was not identified until the 18th century AD. They developed this technology entirely by trial and error, and did so in a really remarkable way.
I can't agree more, because we have them in the 11th century in Sidon, Lebanon.
Yeah.
So it's not the Philistines, it's still the Canaanites.
Yes.
And it's imported from Cyprus. Thank you.
The police are intervening with me even, and I'm supposed to be the police for the session. So, but Muley will be around, and you can ask him questions after the session. So please join me in thanking him once again.
Thank you.
Everyone who works on Cyprus knows the long-standing and very important work done by the Polish team at Paphos. Today we're fortunate to have an interdisciplinary team telling us more about the broader maritime landscape, the other harbors. Many of you will know the important work done in the 90s by Bob Holfelder with John Leonard on the main harbor you can see today, and we're looking today at other harbor complexes in a broader maritime landscape. So I'm very excited to introduce Lukasz Miszk, who will be presenting, I think, on behalf of his interdisciplinary team on Paphos' Harbors Revisited, results of interdisciplinary research of the Paphos Agora project. So, Luka.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I know that I'm the last one, we are late, so I try to be fast and hold your attention. I will start for some nice words. It's my first time in the Maritime Society of Archaeologists. You are really nice people, and it's really pleasure to have an opportunity to be with you tonight. And I would like to say a few words about our research concerning Paphos harbors. But I have to say that I'm not the only one from our group. There are three my colleagues. In case if you have some question about specific topics concerning our presentation, I think they will answer with pleasure. Okay, let's go. What we can expect on our presentation, I will first make a short introduction, introduce the research question, say a few words about workflow design, and try to present you some results. But I have to underline that some of these results are really preliminary because we honestly have finished our expedition a few days ago. So that's why part of them are really, really fresh. Okay, maybe short briefing for people who are not aware, not familiar with the Paphos. It's a city located on the southwest bank of the Cyprus, built on this small promontory. You can see here the orthophoto plan of the modern archaeological park with the grid of the streets reconstructed by the Professor Młynarczyk. And we will be focused on the area of the northwest bank of the city, outside of the city walls, where we trying to verify hypotheses about existence of the additional harbor or haven which could be located in this area. What exactly research question would like to ask and try to answer? First, did any maritime infrastructure exist in the area of the northwest by Paphos promontory? Second, what was the character of the area outside of the city wall? And third, what natural processes affected the area under study? Sorry. We decided to make some kind of the workflow design. It consists 3 steps. First, desktop studies. Second, field work. And third, post-processing of all gathered data. We are trying to construct a GIS database of all registered monuments of the Nea Paphos, because I have to say now that looking for the additional harbor, it's part of the bigger project which is conducted by us on the terrain of the Nea Paphos ancient city, which main aim is to find all remains of the economical infrastructure. We assume that existence of the harbor could be quite important for a picture of the economy of the city. That's why we have decided to deal with this problem. Okay, and the results of our research, we of course started from the query of the written sources. I would like to focus your attention on 2 important written sources. First is anonymous Stadiasmus, which was bring to light on the one paper before, which tell us about existence of the harbor in Paphos, which in this harbor is described as a triple harbor. In fact, it's some kind of the philological discussion if the word triplon means in this particular case as a triple harbor of it was 3 harbors. It's hard to compare with other examples from this title, because this particular word is used only in case of Paphos. Trying to solve this problem, some of the researchers built a hypothesis that maybe Paphos had 3 harbors, and some of the ideas were stated on the even in the 60s by Professor Daszewski, who was conducting excavations in Paphos since 2014. However, I would like to also focus your attention on the second written source, which is it's only a written source from 19th century, which described the area where which is under study, and especially this part where when the Jeffrey writing want to describe this area as a swamp, which could be very very interesting concerning our data, but I will follow it later. I would like to focus your attention also on some old maps, especially maybe on the map drawn by Ali Bey, who described quite in details terrain of the Paphos Park. Both one remains probably from the Fanar Hill and the remains from the Tombs of the King, and between these 2 remains he drew Angkor and the bay. So maybe it could indicate that there, even in 19th century, this northern western bay could be used as a small haven. The same we can see in the in other map from 18th century. Again, we have 2 anchors from the on the two sides of the promontory when the Paphos was located. And going to the query of the aerial historical photographs, it's really interesting thing that all this area is covered by unknown materials. Okay, we know what was that, but when we started to looking for all the data, we're quite surprised that in '68 this whole area were covered with something. When we started to dig deeper, we find out that on the 93 pictures, this whole material was removed. After consulting with the archaeologists from this, who was working this district, we get the knowledge that all this area were covered with the sand, of the high quality sand, which was taken from there for a lot of construction until on this area the archaeological park was set up. Also, we conduct landscape prospection, which was conducted by our colleagues from the Kielce University. The main interest of our research were what kind of affection could have a Koskinas River for hypothetical accumulation of the materials in this bay area. In fact, prospections showed that some actions which were affected by the river are quite the same in the Koskinas and the Ezusas River, which is located quite here. And it could be possible that during the ancient time, some kind of the sediment materials were transported into the river and through the current, sea current, were accumulated in the Northwest Bay. Trying to reconstruct how deep today the sedimentary layer are on this area. We conduct also the GPR prospection on the shore of this Northwest Bay, and we've done 3 profiles, 1, 2nd and 3rd, and we get 3 pictures. And the most interesting was section 2, where we find some much deeper place in the studied area. But we decided to make some drillings there. Unfortunately, it was done just 2 weeks ago, so we were waiting for a more detailed results. On the rest of the area, we just find out that the sedimentation is quite shallow. It's about 1 to 2 meters depth. Finally, however, we also decided to do some remote sensing research on this terrain. We conduct flights using UAV and to create digital surface model. You can see very clearly the huge moat, which by the French expedition were interpreted as maybe remains of some maritime infrastructure, maybe harbor. Sorry again. In fact, the drillings in this area where the entrance to the harbor was expected shows that the bedrock here is very high. So probably we are here dealing only with the remains of the quarry. This is how it looks in more detail. We also conducted geomagnetic prospection, which gave us really nice results. Here you can see the interpretation of this data. What was the most interesting for us, it was these three features which are marked based on the interferences, which could be interpreted as remains of the building. So we decided to conduct 2 trial trenches. First was set up on this corner of this building, let's say, and second one here. The first trench revealed remains of the burial building, which was quite surprising for us. However, it was dated for a late antique, even early medieval period. But what's the most interesting in this trench? It was the stratigraphy of one of the profile, when you can see 2 strange for us, for this time, 2 layers of the sand. First, quite pure sand, very good quality, and the second one, and almost without any ancient materials, and the second one a layer with some remains of the ancient materials. Whole this trench was covered by sand on the depth 2.5 meters, and I just want to emphasize that this building was original freestanding building. So all this area probably during the ancient times was 2 up to 3 meters lower than it is today. Second trench was set up here to verify this kind of the future, and this line, which on the beginning seems to us as a natural feature. It's how it looks like on the orthophoto map. There is a trench, there is a possibly building or other feature. In fact, we have found one wall which is like the same place on which the interferences was. The second one, the second interference probably were caused because of this very dense layer of the on the ancient pottery. What's important in this trench is that we have distinguished 3 phases of using this area. First, connected with using this really bedrock as a quarry, probably, and we do not have any data about how we can date it. Probably it was before Roman period, because we also distinguish 3 very clear archaeological strata full of utility pottery, I think it's some kind of the clue that this area during early period time was used as an urban place, not for a burial site. And the third phase of using this area was for sure connected with the late ancient or even early medieval burials. Okay, and this is where we are now. There's still some questions which we are not able to answer. However, we would like to say that that existence of a large harbor infrastructure seems to be highly unlikely. However, I have to emphasize that we are still before recognizing of the process of uplifting in this particular area. Before that, we are not be able to say anything for sure. However, maritime activity in this area is possible, especially the early Roman period. And the third, the process of changing of the shoreline in studied area in Holocene is not clear enough and have to be studied further. And maybe after that, we will be able to say something more. I have some time? Time's out. 1 minute? 1 minute, okay. For the end, just for the end, I just want to share with you what we have been doing afternoons during our excavations. We decided to document additional breakwater which was registered during the research conducted in the 90s by the Paphos Harbor Project. So we decided to create very low-cost solution boat using a desk from the jumbo shop with attached GPS on the top and GoPro on the bottom. Nobody thinks this will work out, but finally we have a very nice results. We will be able to do 3D model and orthophoto of the submerged breakwater with quite high quality, and it perfectly fit to the place where it should be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a wonderful introduction and interesting use of technology and available resources. I think we should reward good behavior with at least one question. I beg your patience, perhaps, and then if we have time for one question, then we can all head out thereafter. But surely, given the stage and the excitement of this, I imagine there will be one. So. Only appropriate.
Thank you. Maybe I didn't understand the first part when you explained why initially you searched for a harbor in the northwestern waterfront of Paphos, because this is the most exposed part of the shoreline to the prevailing western winds. So why should anybody, maybe you explained, I mean, it's also...
Yes, okay. There are a few indicators for us. The first of all was recognizing the process of sedimentation here, which was caused by Koskinas River, which is visible on the river profiles. We still are waiting for a dating of this process. Second one, it was that this hypothesis was formulated not for us, but by Professor Daszewski and also by French expedition. So we decided just to verify, because nobody never honestly answered this question. There were some hypotheses. Nothing more, nobody trying to find out. And concerning winds, as far as I understood last research, of course the west winds are quite strong in this area, but only afternoons. During the mornings, the direction of the winds in this area are different. So maybe it could be used just a heaven to wait for a better condition to go into the main harbor, or maybe it was just used by the local fishermen or so on.
Super. Thank you so much.
One
okay,
question.
Fair enough.
Thank you. I am currently editing the Studiasmus Maris Magni, so I pay much attention to this affair. As far as the text is concerned, it said that it's a triple port, but only one port. That's clear if we refer the Studiasmus to itself and to the part this passage does belong to. This would fit quite well with the two basins already identified at Paphos, and probably the third one in the southernmost part of the port. As it has been said, all this coast is just awful. So there is no shelter outside the artificial harbour. And when the Studiasmus wants to say there are two or more limenes, he says that there are limenes, not limena.
Okay, yeah, I just I'm not philologist, so I'm totally accept. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I want to thank you all very much for attending this session. Thank the speakers, and for Justin and myself, we have certainly enjoyed this interlude with you all. I would encourage you, before the posters go down, which will probably be very soon, were they not, Stella?
Right after the session, we have
there are 6 posters associated with this session, many of them done by young Cypriots coming up in the field, but they're all related to harbours, coastal erosion, etc. And there is also a poster on the conservation project that was done by the Honor Frost Foundation for the small ceramic objects from the Kyrenia ship. Good evening to you all. Remember that tomorrow we are not here. We're back at the initial venue. 8:30, the buses will be leaving from the 2 different venues. Location 8:30.